At 4 a.m., the phone rings in Canberra. A prime minister is asleep behind guarded doors, and somewhere in the dark a decision is forming that will split a nation in two. The man who will trigger it isn't a revolutionary in the streets. He's a tall, controlled grazier's son with a patrician voice, someone Australians are taught to trust. And yet, within a few years, half the country will spit his name like a curse. The other half will call him the only adult left in the room. Malcolm Fraser doesn't begin as a villain or a savior. He begins as a boy raised to believe power is a duty, and then discovers that duty can demand betrayal. He is born on 21st May 1930, into a world of wide paddocks and inherited expectations. The Fraser family's property, Nareen, sits in Western Victoria like a small kingdom of fences, sheep, and weather. The Great Depression has already taught Australians what hunger looks like. The Second World War will soon teach them what fear sounds like. Malcolm grows up with both lessons in the air, even if his household is insulated by land and status. His father, John Fraser, is a successful pastoralist and later a member of the Victorian Parliament. Politics is not a distant spectacle in this home. It's dinner table oxygen. The message is simple. Leadership is what your kind does. But the boy is not just being groomed for comfort. He is being trained for control. Boarding school hardens him early. At Melbourne Grammar, the rituals of privilege come with a price. You learn to swallow emotion, to win without looking like you're trying to take hits and keep your face still. Fraser is tall, athletic, and already carrying that peculiar mix of reserve and certainty that will define him. He is not the loudest in the room. He is the one who watches, remembers, and waits. Then comes Oxford, Magdalen College, where the old empire still echoes in the stone corridors. For a young Australian conservative in the early 1950s, Oxford is both finishing school and ideological forge. Britain is shrinking, but it doesn't know it yet. The Suez Crisis is on the horizon. Decolonization is accelerating. The post-war welfare state is remaking society. Fraser absorbs the debates, the manners, the sense that history is something you can steer if you have the nerve. He studies philosophy, politics, and economics, the classic toolkit for men who intend to govern. He also learns something more dangerous, that institutions can look eternal right up until the moment they crack. When he returns to Australia, he steps into a country changing faster than its leaders admit. The long post-war boom is building suburbs and expectations. Television is beginning to shape politics into theater. The old parties still speak in the accents of the 1940s, but the electorate is younger, more urban, less deferential. Fraser could have stayed on the land, lived a life of wealth and quiet influence. Instead, he chooses the arena where reputations are made and destroyed in public. He enters the Liberal Party, the party of Robert Menzies, Australia's dominant conservative force. In 1955, at just 25, Fraser wins pre-selection for the federal seat of Wannon, a vast rural electorate in Victoria. It's a safe seat, but safe seats can be traps. They breed complacency. Fraser doesn't treat it as a retirement plan. He campaigns hard, speaks with discipline, and wins. At 26, he walks into the House of Representatives as one of the youngest members. The chamber is full of older men who have survived war and depression. They look at him and see youth, privilege, and ambition. He looks at them and sees a ladder. The early years are apprenticeship. Fraser learns the machinery, party rooms, committees, the quiet power of numbers. He learns that politics is not only about speeches, it's about who owes whom, who can be trusted, who panics under pressure. He also learns the first rule of survival. Never let them see you bleed. His public style is controlled, almost chilly, but beneath it is a fierce competitiveness, a hunger to matter. In the 1960s, Australia is pulled deeper into the Cold War. The Vietnam War becomes the moral and political earthquake of the era. Conscription, national service, forces young men into a conflict many Australians barely understand. Protests grow, families split. The streets fill with anger. Fraser, like most of his party, supports the alliance with the United States in the anti-communist stance that frames the war. Yet even here, the story is not simple. He is not a man of slogans, he is a man of order. He believes the state must be strong enough to hold the line, to prevent chaos. That belief will later collide with a different kind of chaos, one that comes not from protesters, but from the very heart of government. His rise is steady. In 1966, Harold Holt makes him Minister for the Army. Fraser is only 36. The job is a live wire. Vietnam is escalating, casualties are mounting, and the public mood is turning. The Army portfolio is not ceremonial. It is where policy meets body bags. Fraser is now responsible for decisions that will shape lives in the most literal way. He visits troops, deals with logistics, and faces the moral weight of sending citizens into combat. The pressure is constant, and it teaches him something crucial. In politics, time is never on your side. Every day you delay, events decide for you. After Holt disappears in the surf at Cheviot Beach in 1967, an image that still feels unreal, a prime minister swallowed by the sea, John Gorton takes over. Fraser moves through senior roles, Minister for Education and Science, then Minister for Defense. He is now at the center of national security, at a moment when the world feels unstable and Australia's identity is shifting. The old British anchor is loosening. The American alliance is tightening. The country is beginning to look toward Asia with a mix of anxiety and necessity. Fraser's worldview is shaped by this. Australia must be defended, alliances must be maintained, and internal division must not be allowed to tear the fabric. But the Liberal Party itself is not immune to division. Gorton is a different kind of leader, more populist, less predictable, willing to bend the party's traditional lines. Inside the government, tensions build like pressure behind a dam wall. Fraser, disciplined and orthodox, begins to see Gorton as a risk, a man who could cost them power, credibility, and control. The conflict is real, personal, and escalating. It is not a theatrical rivalry. It is a struggle over what the conservative side of Australian politics will become. In March 1971, Fraser detonates the bomb. He resigns as defense minister and publicly attacks Gorton's leadership. In Australian politics, this is not just disloyalty. It is near sacrilege. Ministers are supposed to swallow their doubts, keep the show on the road. Fraser refuses. He accuses Gorton of interfering in defense matters, of undermining proper process. The words are measured, but the act is brutal. It is a moment that reveals Fraser's core. When he believes the system is being damaged, he will strike, even if it makes him look ruthless. The party erupts, a leadership spill follows. Gorton survives by a single vote, then in a twist that feels like political theater, declares the result not a vote of confidence and steps aside anyway. William McMahon becomes prime minister. Fraser returns to cabinet. He has helped topple a leader, and he has learned a dangerous lesson. You can kill a king and live. That knowledge will sit inside him like a loaded weapon. Yet the victory is hollow. McMahon's government is tired, divided, and facing a labor opposition that is sharper than anything Australia has seen in a generation. Gough Whitlam is remaking the Australian Labor Party into a modern machine, promising sweeping reforms and a new national confidence. The electorate is restless. After 23 years of conservative rule, the air tastes like change. Fraser watches Whitlam closely. He is not merely an opponent, he is a threat to the entire conservative worldview. Whitlam speaks of a more independent Australia, of ending conscription, of expanding government's role in health, education, and culture. To Fraser, it looks like a gamble with the nation's stability. But he also understands Whitlam's power. He is charismatic, articulate, and riding a wave of social transformation. Fraser's challenge is not just to defeat him, it is to survive him. In 1972, the inevitable happens. Labor wins. Whitlam becomes prime minister. The Liberal Country Party coalition is thrown into opposition, stunned and disoriented. For Fraser, opposition is not exile, it is preparation. But it comes with a clock ticking loudly in his head. He is in his early 40s, young enough to wait, old enough to know waiting can become a life sentence. Politics is full of men who were next until they weren't. The coalition chooses Billy Snedden as leader. Fraser becomes a senior figure, but not the top. He is restless. He believes the party needs harder edges, clearer discipline, a more aggressive strategy against a government he sees as reckless. Whitlam's administration moves fast, ending conscription, recognizing China, launching ambitious programs. It also stumbles, hit by economic turbulence and internal missteps. The early 1970s bring global shocks. Inflation rises, the oil crisis hits, and the old certainties of growth begin to wobble. In this environment, every mistake becomes ammunition. Fraser's conflict now is two-front. On one side is Whitlam, the reformer with momentum and a mandate. On the other is his own side's hesitation. Leaders who, in Fraser's view, are too cautious, too polite, too willing to let labor define the battlefield. He begins to position himself as the alternative. Tougher, more strategic, less sentimental. He is not trying to be loved. He is trying to win. The tension tightens in 1974. Whitlam calls a double dissolution election. The campaign is fierce, the country polarized. Labor is returned, but with a reduced margin. The Senate becomes a battlefield of numbers and procedure. Fraser sees what many voters don't. The real war may not be fought in the House of Representatives at all. It may be fought in the rules, the supply bills, the constitutional levers that most citizens never think about until they're pulled. Inside the coalition, dissatisfaction with Snedden grows. Fraser's supporters whisper that the party needs a fighter, not a conciliator. Snedden tries to hold the line, but Fraser is patient in the way a predator is patient. He waits for the moment when the party's fear of losing becomes stronger than its fear of internal bloodshed. That moment arrives in March 1975. Fraser challenges Snedden for the leadership and wins. The shift is immediate. The opposition is no longer simply opposing. It is preparing to force a reckoning. Fraser becomes leader of the opposition, and with that title comes a countdown he can't ignore. Whitlam still holds government. The next election is not guaranteed to deliver victory. The economy is worsening. Scandals and controversies swirl. The public mood is volatile. Fraser knows that if he miscalculates, he won't just lose an election. He will be remembered as the man who overreached, who tore at the system and failed. And now the clock becomes personal. He has a narrow window. Strike too soon and you look desperate. Strike too late and Whitlam recovers. Every week matters. Every parliamentary sitting is a chance to tighten the noose or to slip it. Fraser's style hardens. He speaks of responsibility, of restoring order, of stopping what he frames as government incompetence. Behind the scenes, strategy meetings revolve around one explosive question: how far can the opposition go to bring a government down? In Australia's Westminster system, the ultimate weapon is supply, the money that keeps the government running. Deny it, and the machinery of state begins to choke. It is a constitutional option, but one loaded with moral dynamite. Use it, and you risk being seen as sabotaging democracy itself. Fraser is not yet pulling that trigger here, but the idea is now alive, breathing in the room with him. The nation doesn't feel it yet, but the ground is already shifting under its feet. A confrontation is coming that will test not only Fraser's ambition, but the limits of Australia's political system. And the man who once toppled a prime minister from within his own party is now staring at a far bigger target, with far higher stakes. Because the next time Malcolm Fraser decides that duty requires a strike, it won't just end a career. It will stop a country. The first time Malcolm Fraser truly understands what he's about to do, it isn't in a roaring parliament or a packed campaign hall. It's in the quiet arithmetic of power, numbers on a page, dates on a calendar, and one brutal fact: if he waits, he may never get another chance. The government has money for only so long. The Senate has only so many sitting days. And the country, restless, angry, exhausted by scandal and inflation, can flip from patience to fury overnight. Fraser has a window measured not in years but in weeks. Miss it, and Whitlam survives. Take it, and Fraser becomes the man who pulled the pin on Australia's most explosive constitutional grenade. By mid-1975, the Whitlam government is bleeding from 1,000 cuts. Some are ideological, conservatives furious at the speed of reform, at the sense that old Australia is being bulldozed. Some are economic, rising inflation, unemployment climbing, the aftershocks of the global oil crisis turning household budgets into battlegrounds. But the most dangerous wounds are self-inflicted: administrative chaos, ministerial missteps, and a growing public impression that the government is improvising with the nation's credit card. Then comes the story that turns politics into a thriller: the loans affair. It sounds technical, almost boring, until you picture it properly. A government desperate for funds outside normal channels, chasing billions through shadowy intermediaries, trying to secure massive overseas loans without the usual scrutiny. Names like Kimlani enter the public bloodstream, and suddenly the government's competence isn't an abstract debate. It's a nightly news spectacle. The details are messy, but the smell is simple: secrecy, desperation, and a willingness to bend rules. For Fraser, it's not just ammunition. It's proof. Proof that Whitlam's team can't be trusted with the machinery of state. And Fraser is no longer merely opposing. He is hunting for a lever strong enough to move a government. That lever is the Senate. Australia's system gives the upper house real teeth. The government may command the House of Representatives, but it still needs supply. The appropriation bills that keep public servants paid and departments running block supply, and the government begins to suffocate. It's legal, it's constitutional, It's also the kind of move that can make you look like you're holding the country hostage. Fraser knows the risk. He also knows something else. The Senate numbers have shifted in a way that makes the weapon usable. 2 Labor senators have been replaced in controversial circumstances, and the balance is now tilted. The opposition can, if it chooses, delay or deny supply. The question is whether Fraser has the nerve to do it, and whether he can keep his own side united long enough to see it through. Because this is his real conflict now. Not just Fraser versus Whitlam, but Fraser versus the fear inside his own ranks. Many conservatives want Whitlam gone, but not at any price. They can already imagine the headlines. Opposition shuts down government. They can already hear the accusation. You're overturning the will of the people? Fraser's colleagues worry about backlash, about history, about whether the Governor General would even act. Fraser listens, weighs, and keeps his face still. He has lived his whole political life behind that mask of control. But the stakes are now so high that even control becomes a kind of violence. He chooses escalation. In October 1975, the opposition in the Senate moves to defer the supply bills. Not defeat them outright, delay them. A slow tightening of the throat. The government can't spend without parliamentary approval. The longer the bills are held up, the closer the country gets to a shutdown. Fraser's message is blunt. Call an election, let the people decide, and supply will pass. Whitlam refuses. He insists the government has the confidence of the House and will not be bullied by the Senate. He frames Fraser's tactic as illegitimate, an abuse of power by an opposition that can't win the normal way. Now the nation is watching a standoff like a car crash in slow motion. Each day the pressure rises. Public servants begin to wonder if their pay will stop. Departments prepare contingency plans. The language of constitutional convention, normally the dry domain of lawyers and academics, becomes dinner table talk. Australians argue in pubs and kitchens about what democracy even means in a system where the Senate can choke the government's finances. Fraser is painted as a saboteur by his enemies and as a last line of defense by his supporters. Whitlam, for his part, becomes more defiant, more theatrical, convinced that if he holds his ground, Fraser will blink. Fraser does not blink, but the clock is merciless. Supply is not an idea, it's a deadline. As the crisis deepens, Whitlam searches for a way around the blockade. He considers half measures, legal maneuvers, anything that keeps the government functioning without surrendering to Fraser's demand for an election. The government explores whether it can secure funds through other means, whether it can keep paying wages, whether it can outlast the Senate. Every option looks like a constitutional minefield, and hovering above it all is one figure who almost never speaks publicly: the Governor General, Sir John Kerr. In Australia's system, the Governor General is the Crown's representative, usually ceremonial, usually invisible. But the Constitution gives the office reserve powers, rarely used, poorly understood, and terrifying when they suddenly matter. Kerr is not a robot. He is a man with his own judgments, his own anxieties, his own sense of duty, and now he is watching a government run out of money while the opposition refuses to yield. Fraser's strategy depends on one thing: that Kerr will eventually force a resolution. Either Whitlam calls an election or Kerr intervenes. Fraser cannot control Kerr. He can only create conditions where Kerr feels he must act. That is the gamble. That is the cliff edge. Behind closed doors, Kerr meets with Whitlam. He meets with Fraser. He consults legal advice. He worries about precedent. He worries about chaos. He worries about being trapped. About Whitlam advising the Queen to dismiss him if he refuses to play along. The crisis is no longer just political. It's psychological. It's a contest of nerves where every participant suspects the others of plotting. Then comes the day that will be replayed in Australian memory like a looped film reel. 11 November 1975. Canberra is bright, ordinary, almost indifferent. People go to work. Cars move through the streets. Inside Parliament House, the government expects to keep fighting. Whitlam plans to call a half-Senate election, an attempt to break the deadlock without surrendering the House. He believes he can outmaneuver Fraser and survive. Instead, Kerr makes his move. Whitlam goes to Government House and is dismissed as Prime Minister. Dismissed, not defeated in the House. Not voted out by the people. Removed by the Governor General using reserve powers that most Australians have never seen used in their lifetime. The shock is physical. It hits like a punch to the chest. In a single moment, the crisis stops being a chess match and becomes a national trauma. And here is the twist that turns Fraser from strategist into the central actor of the drama. Kerr commissions Malcolm Fraser as caretaker, Prime Minister, on the condition that Fraser can secure supply and then advise an election. Fraser agrees. Within hours, the supply bills that had been blocked are passed. The machinery of government, which had been choking, suddenly breathes again, but now under a different prime minister. The speed of it is almost obscene. Weeks of deadlock, then instant resolution the moment Whitlam is gone. To Whitlam's supporters, it looks like a coup executed with parliamentary procedure. To Fraser's supporters, it looks like the system saving itself from a government that refused to face the electorate. Outside Parliament, Whitlam stands on the steps and delivers words that become legend. Well, may we say, God save the Queen, because nothing will save the Governor General. The crowd roars, rage floods the air. The country is split down the middle, not by policy, but by legitimacy. Who has the right to govern? Who broke the rules? Who defended them? Fraser, now Prime Minister, has what he wanted. Power, but it comes wrapped in fire. And he has almost no time to make it stick. He is caretaker. He must go to an election. He must win, or he becomes a footnote. The man who briefly held office after a dismissal, then got thrown out by voters furious at the method. The countdown is immediate. The election is set for December 1975, barely a month to convince Australians that what happened was not theft, but necessity. The campaign is savage. Whitlam is no longer just an opponent. He is a wounded lion, roaring about democracy and betrayal. Labor rallies are electric with anger. Fraser's rallies are disciplined, focused on stability, on restoring responsible government, on ending what he calls chaos. He promises order, competence, and a reset. He also carries the burden of explaining an event that feels, to many, like the ground shifting under their feet. Fraser's message is simple and relentless. The Whitlam government could not govern. It could not secure supply. It refused to face the people. Therefore, the people must decide. He frames the dismissal as the last resort of a system pushed to the brink. He speaks like a man trying to sound calm while standing in the middle of a storm he helped create. Australians vote on 13 December 1975. The result is not close. It is a landslide. Fraser's coalition wins overwhelmingly. The scale of the victory is itself a kind of shock, proof that a huge portion of the electorate either accepted Fraser's justification or simply wanted Whitlam gone, whatever the method. Fraser is no longer caretaker. He is Prime Minister with a mandate, and with it comes a new kind of pressure. Now he must govern, not merely defeat. But the victory doesn't heal the country. It hardens it. The dismissal becomes a scar that never fully fades. For years, the words 11 November will carry a charge. People will argue about it like they argue about religion. Facts mixed with faith, law mixed with emotion. Fraser has won power, but he has also inherited a nation that distrusts its own institutions more than it did before. The Governor General's office is no longer a distant symbol. It is a weapon people have seen fired. The Senate is no longer a chamber of review. It is a trigger. And Fraser, whether he likes it or not, is the man whose name is welded to the moment the system revealed its hidden teeth. He moves quickly to consolidate. His government begins dismantling parts of Whitlam's agenda, tightening spending, promising economic restraint. He presents himself as the antidote to excess. Yet even as he steps into the full authority of office, the shadow of how he got there follows him into every room. Every decision is judged through that lens. Is this the restoration of order or the reward of a constitutional ambush? And somewhere beneath the triumph, another clock starts ticking. Because Fraser has achieved the most dangerous kind of victory, one that proves you can win by pushing the system to its limits. The temptation now is to keep pushing, to keep controlling, to keep believing that stability is something you can force into existence. But history has a way of punishing men who think they can command it. Fraser has climbed to the top in the most dramatic way possible. He has stared down a government, gambled on the Governor General, and walked out of the fire holding the Prime Ministership. The question that now hangs over him, quiet, heavy, unavoidable, is whether he can turn this explosive moment into a lasting era, or whether the very tactics that brought him power have planted the seeds of his eventual undoing. The first test of Malcolm Fraser's prime ministership isn't a bill, or a budget, or a foreign crisis. It's a feeling in the air, like smoke after an explosion. He walks into office with a landslide behind him and a constitutional firestorm still burning in the streets. Half the country sees him as the man who restored order. The other half sees him as the man who helped tear a hole in democracy. And now he has a deadline that doesn't appear on any official calendar. He has to make Australia believe in his government before the anger hardens into a permanent identity. He moves fast, almost aggressively, as if speed itself can outrun the controversy. The Whitlam years are framed as a cautionary tale. Too much spending, too much improvisation, too much chaos. Fraser's pitch is the opposite. Restraint, competence, responsible government. But restraint is not a neutral word in a country where inflation is chewing through wages and unemployment is climbing. For ordinary families, restraint can sound like punishment. For Fraser, it's survival. If he can't tame the economy, the dismissal will stop being the story of 1975 and become the prologue to his failure. The numbers are ugly. The global economy is still reeling from the oil shocks. Prices rise faster than pay packets. Businesses hesitate. Jobs vanish. Fraser's treasurer, John Howard, becomes the face of a hard message. The country must live within its means. The government tightens spending, pushes for wage restraint, and tries to squeeze inflation down without crushing the workforce entirely. It's like trying to hold a live wire with bare hands. Let go and the system sparks. Grip too hard and you get burned anyway. And then, almost immediately, Fraser is forced to prove he can do something Whitlam couldn't. Hold his own team together. Because Fraser's coalition isn't a single creature. It's a stitched-together animal. Liberals and nationals, urban and rural, free market instincts and protectionist habits, pragmatists and ideologues. Fraser is the man at the center. Tall, controlled, patrician, projecting calm. But calm is not the same as unity. Every major decision threatens to split his base, cut spending, and you anger those who depend on government programs. Loosen up, you betray the promise of discipline. He governs like a man walking a tightrope with a storm coming. In 1977, he goes back to the people and wins again. Another strong victory. On paper, it looks like consolidation. In reality, it's a warning. He's now responsible not just for stability, but for direction. The country expects results, and the world is changing faster than Australia's political arguments can keep up. Fraser's most dramatic pivot comes in foreign policy, where he surprises people who think they already know him. The man who rose to power as the conservative antidote to Whitlam begins to carve out a reputation that doesn't fit the stereotype. He leans into diplomacy, into alliances, into a more active role in the region. He strengthens ties with the United States, but he refuses to be a simple echo. He wants Australia to be taken seriously by Washington, by London, by Asia, by the Commonwealth. He wants the country to look outward with confidence, not inward with fear. Then comes a moment that crystallizes his moral instincts in a way that shocks even some of his supporters. Refugees. In the late 1970s, the images are searing. Small boats, crowded decks, exhausted faces, families fleeing Vietnam after the war. The boat people become a political lightning rod. Fear spreads easily. Fear of numbers. Fear of cultural change. Fear of being overwhelmed. Fraser could have ridden that fear. It would have been the easy path for a conservative leader trying to keep his base comfortable. Instead, he chooses the harder one. His government accepts large numbers of Indochinese refugees and builds a framework for resettlement. It's not just a policy, it's a statement about what kind of country Australia wants to be. The decision carries risk. It invites backlash. It forces the government to spend political capital at a time when the economy is already draining it. But Fraser pushes it through, and in doing so, he helps reshape modern Australia's multicultural reality. Not as a slogan, but as a lived demographic shift. Years later, people will argue about immigration with the heat of culture war. But Fraser's choice in that moment is unmistakable. He sides with humanitarian obligation over easy applause. He also takes a stand against apartheid South Africa, using the Commonwealth as a platform to pressure the regime. It's another unexpected angle for a man often painted as a cold conservative. Fraser is not a sentimentalist, but he has a strong sense of moral order, an idea that some lines should not be crossed, even if crossing them would be convenient. Yet while Fraser is building this international and humanitarian legacy, the domestic battlefield is tightening around him. The economy refuses to behave. Inflation and unemployment, those twin nightmares, don't politely take turns. They overlap. The old tools don't work cleanly anymore. Every attempt to slow prices risks deepening joblessness. Every attempt to stimulate jobs risks feeding inflation. It's a trap that makes governments look incompetent, even when they're simply trapped by global forces. And then in 1979, the world throws another punch. A second oil shock. Energy prices surge again. The pressure returns like a fever that won't break. Fraser's promise of stability starts to sound less like a plan and more like a prayer. Inside his own party, impatience grows. Some want sharper free market reforms. Others want protection for industries and regions that feel exposed. Fraser's leadership style, centralized, controlled, sometimes imperious, keeps the machine moving, but it also breeds resentment. He is not a natural backslapper. He doesn't dissolve tension with charm. He manages it with authority. That works until it doesn't. And then comes the deadline he can't negotiate with. Time itself, measured in elections. By 1980, the government is tired. The public mood is restless. Fraser calls an election and wins again. But the victory is narrower. The message less enthusiastic. It's the kind of win that feels like a warning shot. He still has power, but the ground under it is softer. Now the real conflict shifts. It's no longer Fraser versus Whitlam. Whitlam is gone from the immediate battlefield. The new threat is subtler and more dangerous. Fraser versus the sense that his era is running out of momentum. He tries to reset, he reshuffles, he pushes policy. But the country is changing. The political conversation is changing. People want not just restraint, but a story about the future. And Fraser, for all his competence, struggles to provide a vision that feels fresh. His government begins to look like a caretaker of an old order. Careful, managerial, cautious, while the world is demanding adaptation. Then in 1982, a new opponent steps onto the stage with a different kind of energy. Bob Hawke. Hawke is not Whitlam. He doesn't carry the same baggage of 1975. He is a former union leader with a national profile, a man who can talk to workers and business leaders, a man who can smile on television and make it look effortless. He feels modern. He feels like a bridge between classes. And he has something Fraser can't manufacture, a sense of optimism that doesn't sound naive. Fraser sees the danger immediately. Hawke isn't just an opposition leader, he's a mood. And moods are harder to defeat than policies. The tension rises because Fraser's government is now fighting on two fronts at once. On one side, the economy is still stubborn, still refusing to deliver the clean success story he needs. On the other, Hawke is offering Australians a way to move on from the bitterness of the dismissal era without reopening the wound. Hawke can talk about consensus, about bringing people together, about a new start. Fraser, by contrast, is still associated, fairly or not, with the harshness of 1975, with the idea of power taken in a crisis. And then Fraser makes a decision that will define the end of his prime ministership. He calls an early election in 1983. It's a gamble, and it's driven by a brutal calculation. He wants to catch Labour before it fully consolidates under Hawke. He wants to strike while the opposition is still organizing. He wants to control the timing, to seize the initiative, to prove he's still the one setting the pace. But politics punishes misread timing like nothing else. Labour replaces its leader with Hawke just as the election is called. And suddenly Fraser's gamble looks like he's opened the door for the very opponent he feared most. The campaign becomes a contrast of styles. Fraser's stern competence versus Hawke's warm confidence. Fraser warns about economic discipline, about hard choices. Hawke talks about unity, about modernization, about bringing the country along rather than pushing it. The electorate, tired of austerity and tired of tension, begins to lean toward the man who seems to offer relief. Fraser fights hard. He is not lazy, not careless. He is a disciplined campaigner, a man who believes in the seriousness of government. But seriousness can become a weight when people are craving hope. The longer the campaign runs, the more it feels like the country is turning a page. On election night in March 1983, the result is decisive. Fraser loses government. The man who once held the nation in a constitutional vice grip, who once won a landslide after the most dramatic political rupture in Australian history, is now out. Defeated not by scandal, not by a single catastrophic mistake, but by the slow accumulation of fatigue. An economic frustration and a new opponent who embodies change. And here's the sharpest twist. Fraser, the master of political timing in 1975, is undone by timing in 1983. The same instinct that once made him seize a narrow window now leads him to misjudge one. He doesn't linger. He resigns as prime minister and leaves parliament soon after. No long farewell tour, no slow fade. One day he is at the center of the nation's machinery. The next he is outside it, watching someone else take the wheel. But the story doesn't end with the loss, because Fraser's years in power have left a complicated imprint. Economic battles that never fully resolved, a country still arguing about the meaning of 1975, and threaded through it all, decisions that will echo for decades. The acceptance of refugees, the stance against apartheid, the insistence that Australia should act like a serious middle power in the world. He exits office with his reputation split into fragments. Villain to some, statesman to others, and to many an enigma, a conservative, who sometimes governed with unexpected moral courage, a leader who could be both rigid and principled, a man who won power in fire and lost it in a quiet shift of national mood. And as he steps away from the prime ministership, another clock begins, one that will measure not elections, but legacy. The day Malcolm Fraser walks out of Parliament for the last time, the strangest thing happens. The noise doesn't follow him. No motorcade drama, no last-minute reversal, no desperate scramble for numbers. Just a tall man in a dark suit stepping away from the building that had once felt like a fortress. And suddenly the question isn't, can he win again? It's far more dangerous. Who is he when he can't command anything? Because Fraser has lived inside a national argument for almost a decade. To his critics, he is forever the man of 1975, the cold architect of a dismissal that still tastes like metal in the mouth. To his supporters, he is the man who restored order. But outside office, order is no longer something he can impose. He has no cabinet to direct, no party room to discipline, no levers to pull. And the clock that starts now is brutal in a different way. He has only a limited window to define himself before history defines him instead, before the caricature hardens, before the headlines become the epitaph. At first he tries to do what many ex-prime ministers do, step into a respectable distance. He takes on roles that look like the natural afterlife of power. Boards, committees, international work. He becomes involved with the Commonwealth, with global conversations where his experience still carries weight. He is appointed Secretary General of the Commonwealth of Nations in 1989, a role that would have placed him at the center of the very moral battles he cared about: apartheid, decolonization, the fragile dignity of small states. But he doesn't get it. The job goes to Chief Emeka Anyaoku. It's a quiet defeat, the kind that doesn't make crowds chant, but still lands like a punch. A reminder that influence is not a title you keep, it's a permission the world can withdraw. And then the real twist begins. The man who once led the Liberal Party starts drifting away from it. Not in a single dramatic break, but in a series of decisions that feel to his old colleagues like betrayal. Fraser's post-office life becomes a second career, and it's more unpredictable than the first. He doesn't soften into a harmless elder statesman. He sharpens. He looks at the direction of Australian conservatism and sees something he can't stomach: a hardening on refugees, a narrowing of compassion, a politics that treats fear as a renewable resource. And Fraser, who once took in tens of thousands of Indochinese refugees when it was politically risky, cannot watch the country turn that page backward. When Australia introduces mandatory detention for asylum seekers in the early 1990s, Fraser speaks out, not with polite discomfort, but with moral anger. He calls it a stain. He warns that a nation can lose its soul not in a single catastrophe, but in the slow normalization of cruelty. Wire fences, locked gates, children behind barriers, the language of illegals replacing the language of human beings. He knows exactly how easy it is for governments to sell harshness as control. He also knows what it does to a country's character. This is where the conflict becomes personal and real. Fraser versus the political tribe that once carried him. He is no longer fighting labor across the chamber. He is fighting the instincts of his own side, the machinery of his own tradition, the gravitational pull of party loyalty. And party loyalty is a powerful drug in Australian politics. It offers belonging, it offers protection, it offers a ready-made identity. Fraser starts refusing it. He also turns his fire on foreign policy. The old Cold War certainties are gone, but new certainties have taken their place, especially the idea that Australia should follow the United States into whatever conflict comes next. Fraser, who had valued the alliance but never wanted Australia to be a ventriloquist dummy, becomes increasingly alarmed by what he sees as strategic obedience dressed up as realism. After the attacks of 11 September 2001, the world tilts. Fear becomes policy. War becomes a promise. And Australia, under John Howard, Fraser's former treasurer, now Prime Minister, moves quickly to stand shoulder to shoulder with Washington. Afghanistan, then Iraq. The language is absolute: weapons, threats, certainty, urgency. Fraser watches the Iraq case being built and hears echoes of the worst kind of political temptation. The temptation to simplify, 2. Rush to treat doubt as weakness. He publicly opposes the Iraq War. He calls it a mistake. He warns about the consequences, regional instability, radicalization, the moral corrosion that comes from launching a war on contested grounds. And when the justifications begin to crumble, when the promised weapons don't appear, Fraser's criticism doesn't look like hindsight. It looks like a man who saw the cliff edge and shouted before the fall. This is not cost-free. In conservative circles, opposing a conservative government on national security is heresy. Fraser becomes, to some, an embarrassment, an ex-leader who won't stay in his lane. But he keeps going. He writes, he speaks, he argues. He becomes a kind of internal dissident, the most dangerous kind, because he can't be dismissed as a left-wing outsider. He is one of them, or rather, he used to be. And then comes the moment that makes the break undeniable. In 2009, Fraser resigns from the Liberal Party. Not quietly, not with a vague statement about retirement, but with a clear moral indictment. He says the party has changed. He says it has abandoned liberal values. He points to the treatment of asylum seekers, to the politics of division, to a hard edge that he believes has replaced principle with opportunism. Imagine what that means in Australian political culture. A former Liberal Prime Minister, the man who once held the party's highest office, walking away from the party itself. It's like watching a general tear off his own medals because he no longer recognizes the army. But Fraser's post-office life isn't only protest. It's also an attempt to build a different kind of legacy, one that doesn't rely on the old battlefield of 1975. He throws himself into humanitarian work. He becomes involved with Care Australia and other organizations focused on poverty and development. He speaks about global inequality, about the responsibilities of wealthy nations, about the way suffering is often treated as background noise until it becomes a security problem. He also becomes a fierce critic of South Africa's apartheid regime long after it is fashionable, and he remains proud of the Commonwealth. His role in applying pressure? In those years, he is often at his best. Not the tactical politician, but the moral strategist. The man who believes that nations, like individuals, are judged by what they tolerate. And yet the shadow of 1975 never fully leaves him. It follows him into interviews, into public appearances, into the way strangers read his name. Fraser tries at times to explain his actions, why he believed Whitlam had to be stopped, why the crisis demanded extreme measures. But explanation is not absolution, and he knows it. The dismissal is Australia's political ghost story, and Fraser is one of its main characters. He can't rewrite it, he can only live with it. What changes over time is the texture of how people see him. The simplistic labels start to crack. The conservative who accepted refugees. The man of authority who later speaks the language of human rights. The prime minister who preached restraint, who later condemns cruelty. The leader who once fought labor like an enemy, who later finds himself applauded by people who would never have voted for him. It's not a clean redemption arc. Fraser is too complicated for that. He can be stubborn, patrician, certain of his own judgment. He can be blind to how his actions felt to others. But he is also capable of something rare in politics, changing his emphasis without pretending he never believed what he once believed. He doesn't become a different person. He becomes a fuller version of the same one, principled in a way that sometimes cuts against his own tribe. In 2010, he publishes a memoir, and later he releases a sharper, more confrontational book, Dangerous Allies, a warning about Australia, its strategic dependence and the risks of unthinking alignment. He argues that Australia must be able to say no. He argues that sovereignty is not a flag. It's a decision-making capacity. He argues that the alliance should not be a chain. By now, Fraser is an old man, but he writes like someone still in a fight. And in a sense, he is. The time limit is no longer electoral, but biological. He knows he doesn't have decades to shape the argument. He has years, maybe less. So he compresses his urgency into words, into speeches, into interventions that land like stones in still water. Then in March 2015, the story ends abruptly. Malcolm Fraser dies at the age of 84. The news hits Australia with a strange double sensation, the loss of a former prime minister and the closing of a living link to the most dramatic constitutional rupture in modern Australian history. Tributes pour in, but they don't agree with each other. Some praise his humanitarianism, his stance on refugees, his opposition to apartheid. Others cannot forgive 1975. Many admit, with a kind of reluctant honesty, that he was bigger than the box they tried to keep him in. And that's the final, unsettling image. Fraser as a man who spent his early life fighting for power and his later life fighting against the easy uses of power. A leader who entered office through a national trauma and left office through a national yawn, then returned not to govern, but to argue with the country about what it was becoming. If you want a single scene to hold him in your mind, don't picture the landslide victory, or the stern press conferences, or the election. Night defeat. Picture something quieter and sharper. An ex-prime minister, no longer protected by office, standing in front of a microphone and condemning the detention of desperate people, knowing it will anger his own side, knowing it will cost him friendships, knowing it will complicate his reputation, and doing it anyway. Because in the end, Malcolm Fraser's legacy isn't one verdict. It's a collision of verdicts. The constitutional hard man, the refugee advocate, the conservative dissident, the prime minister who could be rigid, and the elder statesman who could be brave. And somewhere in that collision is the uncomfortable truth that makes his story worth telling to the last second. History doesn't always soften people. Sometimes it exposes what was there all along.